We are on DAF, the very bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. We're up to the word Gufa. And let's understand the principle that Rav teaches over here. Rav says, Omar Rav, Ein mavoy niter belechi v'kora ad shihubatim v'chatzeros psuchin l'socha. He says, that the rabbis made this accommodation to allow us to carry in a mavoy that is jointly owned by different neighbors of the shchuna, of the neighborhood. But they told us to do that by creating an incorporated entity, plus you have to create some kind of recognizable sign at the entrance of the mavoy, which is called a lechi, side post, or a korah, or a crossbeam, like we've learned all along through Maseches Eruvin. However, they only made that accommodation if the structure of the neighborhood fits according to a classical neighborhood structure. And the classical neighborhood structure is that you have to have a courtyard on either side of the mavoi, and each courtyard has to have a minimum of 2 homes. So it's a minimum of a courtyard on either side, and a minimum of 2 homes per courtyard. Anything less than that, you don't have the sufficient residence, occupancy of that mavoi for the rabbis to make that special accommodation. Does everyone understand that principle? And that's why Rav had said that when you learned the Mishnah yesterday about a mavoi that is on the side of multiple chatzeros, and therefore there are only chatzeros on one side of the mavoi and not on the other side, then it's not permitted to carry into that mavoi, because it's not bounded on both sides with chatzeros.
Since you're defining a term or a description, Rabbi, could you just clarify the shituf?
The word shituf and eruv are synonymous.
Okay.
The difference between the two is that the word shituf is used contextually with a mavoi, and the word eruv is used contextually with a chatzer.
Okay.
But they really are synonymous. They mean the same things. It's really an artificial distinction that we draw in order to identify whether we're talking about making an eruv in a mavoi or an eruv in a chatzer.
Okay.
So when you talk about an eruv that you're making in a mavoi, you call it a shituf. Okay, but the word shituf and eruv both mean what? Creating an incorporation. Okay, a partnership. Yeah.
I thought one had to do with the ability to do with wine, and one had the ability to have bread.
There was a topic of discussion there, but the maskana is not that way. Okay. Ushmuel Amar, Shmuel, however, disagrees with Rav. Shmuel Amar, afilu bayis echad v'chatzer echas. Shmuel says, I agree that you have to have you have to have either side of the mavoi bounded by some occupancy, but it doesn't have to be a chatzer on either side. You only need a chatzer on one side, but you can have even just one individual home abutting the mavoi. It doesn't have to be a chatzer that opens up to the mavoi with a home in it. It could just be a home, a standalone home, that's abutting the chatzer on the mavoi on the other side. Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu churva. And Rabbi Yochanan goes even further, and he says if you have one chatzer on one side of the mavoi with houses in it, then all you need to have is, and by the way, Rashi explains, according to both Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, the chatzer on the one side just needs to have one house. But on the other side, says Rabbi Yochanan, all you need to have is a churva. A churva is a ruin, which basically means it's an empty lot that's unoccupied, but is fit for occupancy if you just clean it up and build a home there. Okay? But right now it's currently unoccupied. So Amar le Abaye le Rav Yoseph, Amar Rav Yechanan afilu b'shavil shel keramim, question mark. So Abaye asks Rav Yosef, well, how far does Rav Yochanan go? If he allows you to have on one side of the mavoi a ruin, can you also just have a pathway that leads out to a vineyard? Is that enough of a presence on one side of the mavoi to allow you to create an eruv in the mavoi? So Amar le lo Amar Rabbi Yechanan ela bechur v'dechazi lidira aval shavil shel keramim de lo chazi lidira lo. So Rabbi Yosef responded, no. Rabbi Yochanan does not go that far. A ruin is acceptable for Rabbi Yochanan because at least it's occupiable. It's usable for occupancy, because it's basically an enclosed area. You just need to build a house there. But a pathway is not fit for occupancy. And therefore, since it's not even fit for occupancy, it doesn't fit the criteria that you need in order to be able to create an eruv in the mavoi. So Amar Rav Huna bar Chinana va'azda Rabbi Yochanan l'taimei. So Rav Huna bar Chinana says that Rabbi Yochanan, who permits you to have an eruv in the mavui even when you only have a churva on one side, is consistent with another shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Ditnan, Reb Shimon Omer. Reb Shimon says, Echad gagos ve'echad chatzeros ve'echad karfefos rishus echas hein lekelim sheshavtu l'sochan v'lo lekelim sheshavsu b'soch haboyis. Now, Reb Shimon says a halacha as follows. We've seen this halacha before, that if you have multiple carmelios, you have multiple carmelis entities that are adjacent to each other, then it's not necessary to make an eruv from one carmelis to the other. Let's say you have multiple chutzers. You have multiple, or you have one is a gag, one is a rooftop, one is a karfef, an empty lot, and then adjacent to that is a chutzer. You can move objects from one carmelis to the other without even making an eruv. That's perfectly fine, provided that the object at the inception of Shabbos was resting in the chutzer. But if it was resting in a house, which is a private domain, then you're not allowed to transfer it out to a carmelis unless you make an eruv with that domain, and then you'd have to make an eruv to incorporate all three domains together. Okay, so therefore, Reb Shimon says you can transfer from one carmelis to another, as long as the kli, the object in question, was resting at the inception of Shabbos outside in the carmelis. V'amar Rav halacha k'Reb Shimon v'hu shelo irvu aval irvu gazrinan dil ma'asi la'afu keimani debatim l'chatzer. And Rav says not only do we paskin like Reb Shimon on this matter, but it's only true as long as you did not make an eruv to allow you. Let's say you have two chutzers that are adjacent to each other, just as an example, chutzer A and chutzer B. And each chutzer has a house. So you've got chutzer A and bias A. You've got chutzer B and bias B. You can transfer kalim that are resting. Let's say we'll call the utensil that's resting in chutzer A is a tricycle. My kid's tricycle is out in the chutzer. My pot is inside my house. So I know that I'm not allowed to transfer my pot from house A to chutzer B. That I for sure can't do. But I'm allowed to transfer my tricycle from chutzer A to chutzer B. However, qualifies Rav, and he says further, if the people of Chutzer A made an eruv to allow them to transfer pots from their homes out to the Chutzer, then you're not allowed to transfer even a tricycle from Chutzer A to Chutzer B. Why not? Because we're worried that if we allow you to transfer tricycles, you may transfer pots as well. Since the pots are able to get out into Chutzer A from the houses, then you may transfer the pots from Chutzer A to Chutzer B.
The eruv was only made in A.
The eruv was only made in A. And therefore, even though normally without any eruv you can transfer tricycles from Chutzer A to Chutzer B, but now that you've made an eruv within A only to allow you to carry a pot outside to the Chutzer, we're worried that if we allow you to transfer the tricycle, you may transfer the pot as well. Ushmul amar bein irvu ubein lo irvu, v'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha Reb Shimon bein irvu ubein lo irvu. Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, however, disagree. Both Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan say that even if you made an eruv to allow you to carry a pot from house A to Chutzer A, we still will allow you to transfer tricycles from Chutzer A to Chutzer B, because you'll be careful. You'll remember to know that you'll only transfer objects that were resting in the Chutzer and not objects that were resting in the house. Okay? So Alma lo gazrinan dilma asi lafu keimani debatim lachatzer. So what do you see? That Rabbi Yochanan is not concerned that you may end up, by us allowing you to transfer the tricycle, you may end up transferring the pot. Rabbi Yochanan's not worried about that. He says, go ahead, transfer the tricycle, and I'm not worried that you're going to end up transferring a pot. So the Gemara says, by analogy, we can make the following application. So you have to think about this for just a second. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you're allowed to make an eruv in a mavoi that has a chutzer on one side and has a ruin on the other side. Now, when you make the eruv in the mavoi, who's making the eruv? It's the occupants of the chutzer are incorporating the eruv as part of that singular entity. What about the residents of the churva?
There isn't.
There are no residents in the churva. So they're not participating in the eruv because there's no one there. So are you allowed to carry from the churva to the mavoi and from the mavoi to the churva? No, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to. Now, if that's the...
You mean once the eruv is made?
Once the eruv is made, you cannot transfer anything into or out of the churva. All that is required is that the churva be there because you need two types. You need two. Structurally, you need the mavoi to be bounded by occupiable places. But at the end of the day, since there's no one in the churva, it's a ruin. It's unoccupied. You can't transfer there. It's not an occupied territory, right? If I can use that term. So if that's the case, then why shouldn't we be concerned that if I allow you to carry your objects from the chatzir into the mavoi, then you may end up transferring from the mavoi into the churva? The fact is, we're not worried. So you see that Rabbi Yochanan is consistent. Just like in the case of the adjacent chatzirs, we're not concerned that you're going to end up transferring a pot from chatzir A to chatzir B because we allow you to transfer a tricycle. So by analogy, so too, Rabbi Yochanan says that you can transfer from your chatzir into the mavoi, and we're not worried that you're going to transfer from the mavoi into the churva.
Isn't it usher anyways to go into a churva by yourself?
Oh, because of the Gemara says because of the dilapidation, because of shadim, and so.
But if you have to go with two people,
if you go with
warned with the other person, know not to go.
It's a good hara. Okay, it's a good point. So the Gemara doesn't reckon with that over here. Okay. In any event, Yosef Rav Bruna Kamer Lalaha Shmaita. So Rav Bruna was teaching over this teaching of Shmuel. Shmuel was the one who said previously that you don't need to have, he doesn't hold like Rav. He holds that you don't need to have a chutzner on either side, and each chutzner has two houses. He says as long as you have a chutzner on one side, and you have a bias, you even just have a house, it doesn't even have to be a real chutzner, then that's okay. So Amar le Rabbi Lazar, Bar Be Rav, Amar Shmuel Hachi. So Rabbi Lazar says to Rav Brona, Bar Be Rav, you Talmud Chacham, you. In other words, he's saying, like, how could a Talmud Chacham like you say that in the name of Shmuel? Did Shmuel really say such a thing? Amar le in. He said to him, sure, of course Shmuel said it. So Amar le achvili ushpize. So Rabbi Lazar says, show me where Shmuel lives. I want to talk to him. Now remember, Rabbi Lazar lives in Eretz Yisrael. Shmuel lives in Pumpadisa. So Rabbi Lazar must have been visiting Pumpadisa, and he wanted to track Shmuel down because he couldn't believe it that he would paskin that way. So achvile asalakami de Shmuel. So Rav Brona shows him where Shmuel lives, and he comes before Shmuel. Amar le Amar Marhachi. Did you, Shmuel, say such a thing? So Amar le in. So Shmuel says, yes, that's how I paskin. So frekt Rabbi Lazar, v'ha marhu da Amar ein lanu be'eruv ela kiloshen mishnasenu shahamavui lachatzeros kachatzer labatim. But wait a minute, he says, Rabbi Lazar. You had taught that when it comes to Hilchas Eruvin, you have to conform to the language of the Mishnah. Now, the language of all of them, anytime we have a Mishnah, the language of the Mishnah always talks about a mavui that opens up into chatzeros in the plural. And anytime we talk about a chatzer, it's talking about a chatzer that is shared by houses. So it's clear from the language of the Mishnayos in Eruvin that there's a requirement for there to be at least two chatzers per mavoi and at least two houses per chatzer as per Rav. So how could you not agree with that? So ishtik. So Shmuel, when he heard Rabbi Lazar's argument, was silent. He didn't respond. So now the Gemara's question is, kibla mine o lo kibla mine? Was Shmuel's silence a sign that he relented, he recanted his psak? Or did he hold his ground? So, Tashma, let's listen to the following story. There was once a mavoi that was occupied by a man named Ivos Bar-I. Avad le lechaya, v'shara le Shmuel. So he made a lechi on the mavoi, and as becomes evident from the story, this mavoi only had a chatzar on one side. It didn't have a chatzar on both sides. And Shmuel still paskin that it was permitted to carry inside the mavoi. So Asa Rav Anan Shadje. After Shmuel died, Rav Anan came along and he knocked down the lechi. So Amar Mavua de Dairana Be Va'asina Mishmei Demar Shmuel Nesi Rav Anan Barav Nishtaye Min or Nishtaye Man. I'm not sure whether it's min or man. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They say min? Okay. So Evos gets upset with Rav Anan. He says, this mavoi that I've been carrying in, that I live in, and I've been carrying in all of this time, based on the psak of Shmuel, who are you, Rav Anan, to tell me that it's puzzle now? Who are you to tell me that it's puzzle? So, Shma mina lo kibla minei. So anyway, we don't know what the aftermath of that particular story was, but one thing that we can infer from the story is that the fact that Shmuel paskin, that it was permitted for Evos to carry in that mavoi, means that Shmuel held his ground, and he held that it was permissible to carry in a mavoi even when there was a chutzner only on one side. The Gemara says no, not necessarily so, because la'olam eimelacha kibla minei, because really it could be that Shmuel did recant, and he held that you have to have a chutzner on both sides. V'hacha chazana hava dehava achel nahama beveisei v'asi bayes bevei kinishta. But really what was going on over here was that this was a particular kind of mavoi. It was a mavoi that had on one side a chutzner, and on the other side of the mavoi there was a beis hakneses. There was a large synagogue property, which had apparently a courtyard and the synagogue structure in it. And the synagogue is normally not an occupied domicile. It's not a home, right? So therefore, one might infer the fact that its synagogue is not an occupied domicile. It means that all you need to have is an occupancy on one side of the chutzner. But that's not what happened. When Shmuel was alive, there was a shamus, a sexton that lived partially in the Beis HaKnesses and partially lived with his family. And basically the way it worked was they hired this guy. He would live with his home. He would have dinner and lunch with his family, but at night he would sleep in the Beis HaKnesses, I guess to watch over it, right? And then he would, after when his night shift was over, he'd go back to his house. So the Evos Bar Ihi Savar Makom Pita Garim. Evos Bar Ihi was of the opinion that that's still not called occupancy, because he thought that the place where you have your meals is where it's what's called occupancy, is called residence. And therefore he looked at the Beis HaKnesses as an unoccupied area, and therefore he interpreted Shmuel's psak as being based on the fact that you only need to have an occupied chutzner on one side, not on both sides. Ushmuel l'taimei da'amar makom lina garim. But he misinterpreted Shmuel, because Shmuel, when he was alive, the reason why he paskined that you could carry in that mavoi is because he looked at the fact that the shamus slept there every night as the occupancy, as the residence of the shul had residency. And that was the reason why he paskined that it was permitted to carry in the mavoi, because there was occupancy on both sides of the mavoi. So this was the machlokus between Evos and Rav Anan. Evos thought that the reason for Shmuel's psak was because Shmuel held his ground and said you only need occupancy on one side of the mavoi. But Rav Anan noticed that the shamus was fired. The shamus wasn't living there anymore. The shamus wasn't sleeping there anymore. And when he saw that the shamus wasn't sleeping there anymore, he said, hey, listen, Evos, Shmuel's heter only applied so long as the shamus was sleeping there every night. But the shamus is not sleeping there every night, and therefore it's not a kosher, the lechi doesn't mean anything, you can't carry anymore. And therefore he took down the lechi.
Back on the top of Ayin Gimel, Shmuel held that the Makom Lina is the driving factor in the argument between...
Shmuel l'taimei, that's right.
So
the Gemara is saying, Shmuel's being consistent, exactly.
Why did Shmuel remain silent? Why don't we have a record that why do we have to sort of go through all these hoops to figure out what he must have held? The Gemara just says he's remained silent. Didn't he want to have a discussion with Rabbi Lazar?
That's a very good question. There are times when it's to a rabbi's benefit to be silent. Yeah, believe it or not. The fact of the matter is that Rabbi Lazar had a good taina, but Shmuel probably had a response, but he didn't feel that his response would be accepted by Rabbi Lazar. So, like the Chazal say, just like there's a mitzvah to say that which will be heard, there's also a mitzvah to not say that which will not be heard. And ultimately he felt that this was the proper halacha, and even though he felt that perhaps his argument was not as compelling enough to convince Rabbi Elazar, he still felt that that when it comes to laws of Eruvin, since the whole thing is rabbinic institution, we should be makel. We should be lenient. Okay? So that'll explain to you anytime I don't want to talk to you, Bob. You'll understand why. Anyway, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Mavoi shetzido echad obik chavim besido echad Yisrael ein ma'arvin oso derech chalonos lahatiro derech psachim lemavoi. So this is an interesting scenario. You actually have a very good diagram in Rashi. You see the mavoi is in the center of or sort of a little bit to the left in the diagram. On the far left of the diagram, you see a courtyard is occupied by a Gentile, and on the right side, you see a multiple chutzers. Some diagrams have it as 2 chutzers, some have it as 3 chutzers. You have a Yisrael A, his chutzer is abutting the mavoi, and then behind his chutzer is another Yisrael's chutzer. So Yisrael B has a chutzer, but his chutzer is not abutting the mavoi, it's abutting Yisrael A's chutzer. Okay? So the halacha is that you're not permitted that ein ma'arvin oso derech chalonos lahatiro derech psachim lemavoi. It is not permitted for Yisrael A and Yisrael B to make an eruv to each other via the window that they may share to each other's home or to each other's chatzar to enable them to both carry into the mavoi. In other words, even Yisrael A is not permitted to carry into the mavoi. Not only is Yisrael B not permitted to carry his stuff into the mavoi, but Yisrael A is not permitted to carry into the mavoi as well. So Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef, Amar Rav afilu b'chatzer, question mark? So the question that we have, that Abaye has for Rav Yosef is as follows. Is this halacha unique to the case of mavoi, or does it acquire universally any time a property is shared with a Gentile? Does it apply to a chutzner too? Meaning that if a Yisrael has a house and he shares a chutzner with a Gentile, and let's say abutting the Yisrael's house on the other side of the chutzner is another Yisrael, will that halacha also apply that the Yisrael now is not allowed to create an eruv to allow him and the other Yisrael to carry into the chutzner? Does that halacha apply, or is it only a halacha that is unique to a mavoi? And the Gemara's question, really Abaye's question, is that perhaps this is consistent with the laws of mavoi that we learned before, that you have to have occupancy on both sides of a mavoi, but it's only unique to a mavoi, but not to a chutzner. So Amar le in, so Rav Yosef said, no, this is not unique to a mavoi. It's true by a chutzner too, that any time a Yisrael shares property with a Gentile, then you can't create an eruv with another Yisrael to allow the two of you to carry into that domain. Di lo amar, because if what was your thinking about it? That perhaps this was unique to a mavoi. So my hava amina. So what was my thinking? Taima derav mishum de kasaver ein mavoi niter belechi v'kara ad shubatim v'chatzeros psuchim l'socha. That because Rav is being consistent, that just like Rav said that in order to incorporate a mavoi, you have to have chutzers on either side that are occupied with houses. So too, in this case over here, you have a Gentile on one side and a Jew on the other side. That's not called occupancy. V'tarti lamali. So why did Rav need to say the same halacha twice? Tzrich, I'll tell you why. Di'i mehahi hava amina diras avei kochavim shmadira kamash malanda diras avei kochavim lo shmadira. If I would have only had Rav's first statement that you need to have chutzers on both sides, then I might have thought, well, just because a Gentile occupies one chutzner, that's not a reason to not call it a residency. It's still a residency, and therefore it's perfectly fine. So Rav has to make his second statement to say that even though you have a chutzner on either side, but you need both chutzers to be occupied by Jews. If one chutzner is occupied by Jews and the other chutzner is occupied by Gentiles, then that's not considered to be valid occupancy. and therefore you're not allowed to carry in the mavui. That's really what Rav is essentially teaching me over here. V'imei hacha hava mina lo yadana batim kama kamash malan batim train. And if I only had the second statement of Rav, which is this case of where you have a Yisrael on one side and an Akum on the other side, I might have thought that it's sufficient to have one house per chutzner, because Rav doesn't specify in the second statement how many houses are per chutzner. So you need the first statement where Rav specifies you need to have 2 houses per chutzner in order to allow you to carry in a mavur. So hashda da amar Rav afilu chutzner. That's what I would have thought if this halacha was unique only to a mavur. But hashda da amar Rav afilu chutzner. But now that you're telling me that Rav holds of this halacha, that anytime you have shared property with a Gentile, then a Yisrael that is abutting your property, the two of you cannot make an eruv to allow you to carry into the chutzner that he shares with the akum. Taima derav de kasaver asur lasos yachid b'makom obed kochavim. It's because Rav holds that you're never allowed to incorporate with another Jew when you're dealing with a property that is shared with a Gentile. Now let's understand why that is. Why is it that Rav never permits you to make an incorporated entity when you share a property with a Gentile? Rashi tells us is because Chazal wanted to disincentivize a Jew from living in shared property with a Gentile. We don't want you to get too chummy with the idolater, with the heathen, and therefore we would like to prevent you from living in the same courtyard as he. So how do we do that? We're going to isolate you. We're going to prevent you from having a partner as a Jew that will allow you to incorporate, so that the two of you can be neighbors and jointly share that property with the Gentile. And hopefully by doing that, you'll feel so isolated that you'll feel unsafe, you'll feel insecure by living alone by yourself with the Gentile, and you'll move out of the neighborhood, you'll move out of the chutzner. That's the reason why Rav stated his halacha. Now, fortunately, we don't paskin that way, because if we did paskin that way, that it would be impossible to have an eruv in a city, in any town. You couldn't have an eruv because we share the town with non-Jews, and then it would be impossible to ever be permitted to have an eruv. But the fact is that we do permit us to incorporate our houses, and then to what we do is we rent the rights of passage from the Gentiles that are in the city. Now, normally when you want to do this in a chutzner, if you live in a chutzner where there are Gentiles residing, and you want to incorporate the chutzner, what do you have to do? You have to actually give them cash and say, I would like to incorporate with you by having some kind of partnership in your facility, in your domicile. So I give you $1, and that covers my rights of passage into your house ad infinitum, and that enables me to carry every Shabbos. With a Jew, you don't need to do schiras rishus, you don't need to actually rent from him. You just say, let's become partners with a box of matzah. Now, how do we do that on a citywide basis? Did the rabbis go to every single Gentile in Torornto and give them $1?
Or box of matzah?
No, you can't use the box of matzah, right? So the answer is you go to the mayor of Toronto and Vaughan, or you go to the chief of police. You can use either one, and you say, I'd like to give you $1, and because of your search and seizure rights to every Gentile's house, essentially I'm taking permission from you to have some kind of passage rights in the residence of every single Gentile in Toronto into their home. And as a result, that allows us to, that's called schiras rishus, that's called schiras rishus of every single Gentile in Toronto by giving $1 to the mayor.
Once a year, do you have to go on an exercise?
No, you don't have to do it every year, just one time.
We have good relations with the chief of police that in Vaughan.
That's right. That's right. So let me just finish up to the Mishnah. So time of the Rav, because Amar Rav Yoseph ihach. So Rav Yoseph says, so if that's the case, Hainu de Shamana leila Rabbi Tavla da Amar Obek Kachavim Trezimni below Yodana Mayomar. So Rav Yoseph says, now I understand why Rabbi Tavla had recited a halacha twice about a Gentile, and I didn't know why he was saying it twice. It turns out that he was stating 2 halachas. one halacha of sharing occupancy in the same courtyard as a Gentile, and the other one was sharing occupancy in the same mavoi as a Gentile. And that's why, because the Rav's halacha is not unique to a mavoi, but it applies to a chatzar equally to a mavoi, that we want to disincentivize you from sharing occupancy in shared areas with heathens, according to Rav. Have a wonderful day.